I get to go first? You want to arm wrestle?
You go, Tony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Weber, members of the committee. My name is Tony Anderson, and I'm the Executive Director of the ARC of California. Also direct the collaboration of the ARC and United Cerebral Palsy. And today on this panel, I get to be here representing the Lanterman Coalition. And that's a coalition of at least 17 of our largest statewide associations and groups supporting and advocating for people with developmental disabilities and their families. And today, I'm here in the context to talk about a component of our broad letter that we put together. You've already received, I think you've all received our letter that sort of maps out what needs to be done, in our view, to repair a much damaged system that's been under attack, as many have been over several years, at least a decade. So we've laid all that out. You've seen that. But in particular, for this panel, the developmental centers, we have recommendations in there focused on the recommendations of the task force on the future of the developmental centers. And so first I want to make sure that I commend the legislature and thank the legislatures. We have great champions who've pushed this particular issue for so long. It doesn't just happen. The state didn't just decide to look into the future of the developmental centers. It was a lot of pushing, and a lot of that came from many of you that are here today and throughout the building. So I really appreciate that. I can't let that go without saying that piece. Also, though, that it is courageous for the Secretary to stand up and say, we're going to move forward on this. And we have to recognize that she's done that, and we want to thank her for that. You know, the task force was, as she said, not a lot of people gave it a chance. And because this is a long-standing problem, anyone not familiar with our community, it's I guess polite to say that it's very diverse, and more accurate to say that we really fought very hard with one another for many years and could not have a productive task force like the one she put together in years past. And actually, and we talked about it, she talked about that we discussed that at the Olmsted Committee today, the Secretary did, and there was acknowledgement that even 10 years ago you could not have done what she did. And the fact that she put that commitment together was critical and brought the folks together up and down the state several times. So it's very, I can't let that go, the importance of that level of commitment we have not seen in a very long time. I don't know if ever on this particular issue. And people might say, well, why do you have to put together another government task force, right, to fix the problem? Because everybody has a great faith in putting together a government task force, right? Everybody does? Well, some don't. But actually, if you look at what came out of here, this could only have occurred because of the diversity of the group that was put together. And it wasn't just government, it was community people, it was stakeholders, and really working through sincerely on tough ideas. And I'm reminded of a very memorable moment when we looked at developmental centers throughout the country, and they said, if you had enough money, what would you do to fix the problem of developmental centers? You know, we've transitioned developmental centers over a long period of time, and a dozen states don't do them anymore. And many large states today are looking at getting rid of them. But when asked, the guy that was running the ward said that if he had enough money to support everybody with a developmental disability, he would build more padded rooms. And if you think only of your experience that you're dealing with in the day, you only think of those kinds of things, because that was the most urgent to him. But all of us would know today that that's not the approach that we would take, serving people. So that's why I think it was so important that it was so diverse and that the state had issued this commitment. So quickly, I want to tell you that one of our top priorities is that we support all of the recommendations put forth in the task force report on the future of the developmental centers. And that's significant because if you think again that these are 17 very diverse organizations throughout the state, and we support every single one of them. We are in dire need of specialized health-oriented facilities, not just for people in developmental centers today, but also throughout the community everywhere. So, and all of these we perceive as services and supports for everybody in our entire community, in developmental centers and in community. Limited, there's very limited state-run participation in the plan, and we support that. And there is going to be some need, as we discussed earlier, that was brought up, of people can't, they can't be forced to take everybody. All private nonprofits and for-profits that are providing services, it just might not work for the people they're supporting. But we have to have an option where a person will be helped, and a person in crisis will be helped. So we have to have something in place like that, and we recognize that. We have to have crisis capacity. We have terrible health outcomes for our community, so if people are coming out of the developmental centers with very complex health needs, we need to be prepared for them, as well as the current problem that we're dealing with. And the lands being repurposed and used in a productive way for our community is critical. We completely support that. And the one that I think many will tell you is maybe the most critical is that there's a recommendation in here that another task force be convened to address how to make the community system stronger. And you don't get that all the time from advocates asking for more task force. But this one worked well in what we've got, and we want to see the same level of commitment to looking at the community system. There's a rate structure problem. The rates today don't even mirror what the costs are. They don't make any sense. So everything that's in our system today, all of the crumbling that we talked about earlier, has to be addressed, and has to be addressed in this kind of a commitment. And I think finally what I would say is that I talked about this huge level of commitment and how impressed we are with that, and how necessary it was to create a very fine report of these recommendations, but it won't mean anything if we don't move it forward. So what we say is that you have to fund, we need an implementation plan from the department immediately that shows that there's further commitment. It's going to take way more commitment to make this happen, a reality for us all. But it was important to this point. It would be a waste of time and energy to let it die, and we haven't seen anything that says this is what it will take to do it. So it's just critically important that there be a plan in place so that you know and that we know that this is very serious and we are moving forward for the future of people with developmental disabilities and their families.
Madam Chair. Well, I was going to respond to some of the things that the speaker has said, but I can wait until after her.
Okay, let's have Ms. Blakemore, and then we can.
Thank you, and I'll try and be brief to give you time.
I don't want to encourage you to be brief. I want to hear what you have to say.
It's all good. So I'm Catherine Blakemore. Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Weber and members of the committee, to present Disability Rights California's views. We are the protection and advocacy agency for the state of California. For those of you that don't know, we are an entity that was formed because of Geraldo Rivera doing a investigative report of developmental centers, or the equivalent in other states, and the abuse that happened. And so a big part of our mandate is ensuring the protection of individuals and advocacy for individuals to live in the least restrictive environment that's appropriate for them. Our testimony today is informed both because we served as a member of the task force and agree with the recommendations of that, but also because of the work that we've done. The legislature included, over the last several years, requirements that we receive notice of meetings that are held on behalf of individuals living in developmental centers and other community institutions, and writ proceedings where people have indicated they want to leave but have not been able successfully to do so. So over the course of the last year, we've represented close to 75 people in a variety of proceedings, often being successful, working with the regional centers and helping people transition to the community. We, as I noted, say that we support the recommendations of the task force, but I want to be a little more concrete and say 4 things that I think need to be done this year with the support of the legislature. The first is we need to invest in additional community placement plan funds so that we have the best chance of implementing the recommendations, which clearly say we need additional places and different types of placements for individuals to live in the community, particularly for individuals who have more challenging behavioral problems. So it is sort of time to make that investment and allow that to happen so that there are good choices for people to transition from the developmental centers into the community. The second thing that we would say is that DDS in consultation with stakeholders must be clear about the role it will play going forward in the safety net. Tony Anderson alluded to the fact that it may not be possible for nonprofits to meet, community providers to meet every need of every person, that we need a place where no matter what, there will be a home for the individual to live in the community, and that's an appropriate state role, and we need to quickly identify what that role begins to look like in California. We have to identify how will we use the current land. So as we're moving people out, if we want that resource to be available, the state must be clear about what its intent is. Are we going to do some mixed-use development as we have done at Fairview, and what would that look like, and how quickly can that be done in smaller kinds of ways than what current developmental centers are? And we would then encourage the delay of any decision about infrastructure repair, which is identified in the budget. We should not be spending money on what appear to be non-critical needs for infrastructure repair at the same time we're really looking at closing facilities. Well, we would also say to you that moving quickly is important. I note that the budget as presented actually shows a decrease in the number of individuals moving from the developmental centers into the community in the budget year. That doesn't make any sense. We've done over the last 2 years an assessment of each person that lives in the in the developmental center about the services and supports they need in the community. So we have information, and we should not see a decrease in the number of people moving into the community. We also say that because one of the things that's, I think, an unintended consequence that's happened is that there has been an increase in the number of individuals living in locked community institutions, which are often called IMDs, locked skilled nursing facilities. And that does not draw down any federal money, and they're very restrictive places of people's liberty. So we need to sort of come to grips with the task force recommendation, identify the kinds of places people need, invest in that going forward so that we continue the trend of people having appropriate places to live and ensuring that people do not end up in these large locked facilities where we're not generating a penny of federal dollars as a result of those placements. The final thing I want to say to you is, as we change the state's role in providing services for people in developmental centers and we move to a community system, we all have to recognize that the community becomes the safety net. It is the place I hope every person will live. But we're doing that at a time where we have had $1 billion worth of cuts to the community system, and some of that is continuing. And I want to just highlight briefly, I know you have an entire other panel on this topic, but for community services, many people live with their families. IHSS is a really critical service for people to live in the community with their families. We have not yet found a solution to the overtime prohibition that the governor has proposed in the budget. That will have an unintended consequence of people not being able to live in their family home. I also want to call to your attention sort of the disparity between what happens to people who have significant nursing needs until they're age 21. Under a Medi-Cal program called EPSDT, people get a very high level of nursing provided at state expense so they can remain in their family home. When they become adults, they shift to an adult system of care, adult nursing waiver. Those hours drop precipitously. And we need to figure out how to effectively bridge the gap between what Regional Center provides and not just rely on the adult nursing waiver as the stopgap. If we don't take care of the community system as a piece of reducing our reliance on developmental centers, we really will not have made the kind of progress that Disability Rights California would like to see. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments, for everyone that's been on the panel, and we'll continue to have this dialogue. I hope you saw this list that my staff generated concerning issues that are still reports and material that the committee and that the consultants still need. As a newcomer to this committee, obviously it's kind of mind-boggling to me that we're preparing to close centers and then invest money in facilities that we're supposed to close. So I think, and I think you raised that issue. That's a tremendous issue for me as to that. I'm also concerned that I don't see a timeline for closure of all facilities. I think many have come to me and asked questions, will they live long enough to see it? I can't answer that because I don't see a timeline. I hear a discussion of Lanterman, but I don't hear a discussion of the others in terms of what are our plans for the year, how are we bringing down the group, the numbers that's there, have we completed all the assessment we're supposed to complete so that we know exactly what kind of community services are essential. To me, it looks as if we need to continue to move forward with that. Having 40, 50, 60 people watching an empty building sounds extravagant at some point in terms of the amount of money we're putting into a building that will be shut down. Those are kind of questions that seem very unusual to me. So I think we have a lot of questions, at least I do, about the budget issue that's there. My staff has said they've asked for things that we've not gotten, and we need to have them before the May revise for your staff. Data on co-payments and deductibles paid by regional centers pursuant to trailer bills that were adopted last year. Details on the minimum wage and overtime estimates that are there that are supposed to be a 2.25 increase. Whether we're doing anything with early start, restoration, and estimate the historical caseload information we need. Details on deferred maintenance, which I talked about, associated with the $10 million proposed in the governor's budget. Exploratory charts for trailer bills proposals and combined drafts of DDSS and DDS trailer bills, reconciling the changes that are being made by the department in each of these sections. Someone mentioned about IHSS. We need to know what's going to happen, what's that plan for IHSS that's there, and how many will be needing it, and what we plan to do about given the restrictions we put forth. Some kind of, as I said, some kind of chronology with regards to Sonoma and others concerning the persons affected by those units and what timeline we have there. We've gotten a few updates on Porterville, but not enough, and Fairview with regards to current compliance process, what we plan to do about that. And we need to know what we should be thinking about the Lanterman property and what we plan to do with it, rather than investing millions and millions into maintaining a piece of property while we think about what we're going to do with it. We may be better to tear it down than to spend billions of dollars trying to keep something open that we're never going to use again. So there are a lot of questions about money and our process, and it doesn't, if one were to look at this budget and say we're closing these centers, it wouldn't be evident from the amount of money that we're spending. And so I think at some point there needs to be some plan in place that those of us in the legislature can reasonably look at and say, okay, that's why. We've gotten a lot of information about needing a fire department and a something and a something. I don't know, he gave us a whole list of things that we need in a building that's going to be shut down. But I think we need to have some reasonable discussion of it. Obviously, the centers that we're going to rely upon in the community, are we channeling those dollars into that community? It's much more reasonable to do that versus where we are right now. So, I'm a newcomer. I'm just standing on the outside looking in, and what I'm looking at doesn't make sense to me. And I would be the first one to say that I'm not an expert in this subject, but I do add and subtract. And so I don't see enough. I don't see enough subtraction on one area and enough addition on another. And so I think for the staff, we need at least for me, as chair of this committee, I need a better plan of closing down the facilities that are there, a better guideline for those who are here as to what we're doing. Because I think we could stagger and we can tread water for a long period of time, consume a lot of money that should be put into other kinds of services, and really addressing the needs of this population rather than addressing the needs of facilities and roofs and things that we're talking about putting on buildings. So I'm just it's kind of mind-boggling to me that we don't have a plan. And I like to see things put out, that this is where we're going, this is what I can anticipate in 60 days, 90 days, 100 days, next year. Where is the plan to deal with all of these facilities that we claim we're going to close? And then how are we going to channel those resources into other areas rather than just maintaining the physical facility? You don't have to give me all that information now, but I think before the May revise, we need to know that. Okay?
Chairman Weber, just to put it in a quick context, many of the issues you just mentioned are the issues that I think Secretary Dooley was talking about is the next steps, and we will address those for you.
Sounds good, hopefully before May. And I say that simply because you're asking for money that goes beyond May. That's an expenditure of millions of dollars into some things that are supposed to be closed. And so to me, just from the outset, maybe it's very reasonable, and I just don't understand it. But it seems like an awful lot of money being put into the process and not really being channeled into the services that we know we're going to need. And I think the community needs to know that those services are going to be provided in a different kind of way, and that we're going to be somewhat responsible with the resources that's there. My staff is biting at me, not my staff. You guys aren't my staff, huh? These are my colleagues.
I would be proud to be your staff.
No, they would. No, they know much more than I know. My staff does too, so that's okay. But I want to open it up. I know Mr. Chesborough has been wanting to comment, and then Ms. Grove, and then we'll have others. Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to pile on and concur with all of your very cogent questions and the importance of getting that information. So very well put. And I want to thank Ms. Blakemore and Mr. Anderson for their very well-put comments in terms of the circumstances we find ourselves in. However, I want to go a little further than Mr. Anderson, and you were very polite in saying that there were some the other parts of the budget had suffered too. There are a few who have suffered as much as developmental services, but not many. And I just want to recount that we, because I was here, participated in it, sadly, that during the last recession 10 years ago, we hit the system very hard. And back then, like we did in this most recent budget crisis, had to count less bad as the definition of good, but it was bad. And then we did not restore it. We left things frozen. And now, the new, bigger, longer recession comes along, and we went back and hit that system again. And so I just want to, put a highlight on the fact that, well, again, I know as soon as I say this, this is going to start buzzing. People are going to say, well, what about the services to seniors? What about, because there are some areas that we have been equivalently hard on, but nonetheless, there aren't very many. I want to really focus on your proposal that the work that's been done with the stakeholders on the closures or the futures of the future or closures, depending on your point of view, of the DCs, being a useful process and carrying that over into the discussion about how we try to reconstruct the community services. That's important not only because we're going to have people moving out who are some of the people who are most in need of really intensive services in the community if they're going to succeed in the community, but it's also because we don't have enough money to go back quickly anyway to where we need to be. And so we've got to make some hard priority decisions about what it is we need to do. And so to the extent that the various aspects of the community are talking to each other to help amongst yourselves to help us figure out what the priorities are so that we can begin the rebuilding process, perhaps, I hope, beyond what the governor's proposed, somewhat, but also we got to convince him. Nonetheless, I think that collaborative process leads to our ability to advocate successfully on the community's part and have the best chance of getting some real restoration going, and as hopefully a down payment for future years to begin to get back to where we need to be to really fulfill the promise of the Lanterman Act and certainly the legal obligation under Olmstead. So.
And then Mr. Mansell.
I know it's traditionally not. I don't want to say I'm stunned, but I am very, very much pleased. And I know it's not traditional to allow applause in this committee setting, but I applaud you, Madam Chair. I've been sitting on this committee for a year and a half, and I don't have a CSU degree like you do, but I've been sitting on this committee for a year and a half.
I have a UC degree.
UC degree. Sorry. Blew that one, right?
But it's all good.
It's all good. Okay. So I've been sitting on this committee for a year and a half, and for the life of me, I haven't figured out why we fund the DCs for $500 million a year, and they're decertified, and federal funding is gone, and not me, her. So And I haven't been able to figure that out. And to have the chair, and we had a wonderful chair last cycle. I'm not talking negatively about the previous chair, but to have a chair come to the committee and say openly in public that she doesn't get it either. You know, why do we spend $500 million and not funnel this, and the community keeps getting cut? So I just applaud you tremendously for that. So that can't be part of my time on a question, though. I guess the chair has addressed in a general overall 30,000-foot view of some of the concerns that she has, and she'd like that in writing, and I would really like that as well. I do want things addressed, like is there a plan to capture the assets for, you know, the Latterman facility? And if there is, are we going to redirect some of that money to the community? Because over the years that I've been here, and I know previous years, the DC budget for the state has gone up, and the community has been attacked or gone down. I also would like to know, I think there's $70 million available for people to transition into housing outside of the facilities. You guys have that a year. Is it $70 million is the number, roughly? Am I wrong?
John Doyle, Department
Hi.
of Developmental Services. The number is $67 million.
Oh, $67 million. I'm sorry. So there's $67 million. You know, we're the great state of California, and I visited a DC, over two of them actually, over my break, and the families there are interested in having, one family I specifically met with is interested in having their person move out, but he's a what they call a wanderer. He's into everything. He leaves, he walks away. He's hard to keep track of, if that makes sense. And the best that the great state of California could do was a house right on the 405, where the guy could walk right out the front gate and get hit. For enormous amounts of money. I mean, I don't understand why we can't buy a 5-acre farm for half the property in the current, you know, in my area. Who knows, you know? But I am very concerned about the options that are being given to the families of the DC's, you know, the DC consumers for the $70 million that we already allocate on a budget. So I'd like those issues addressed. I think they should have appropriate housing, not just housing like, for instance, on the 405. The parents were mortified. That's just an example. I'd also like you to address the PIP that you talked about earlier with the federal government and what's going on there. Is there progress? What are the actions that are going to be taken so that we don't lose federal funding? Because I understand the federal government has moved to decertify. They've made a move to decertify the other institutions that we have in this state because of inadequate care and unsafe environment. Am I correct or not correct?